10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 245. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 245 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope everybody is doing well out there and ready to get into our third episode on the absolute genius of Charlie Parker and how we can take his ideas and put them into our own playing to improve our improvisation skills. So before we jump into the episode, as usual, I want to give a couple of quick shout outs and mention that you can get a PDF to every single episode that we have ever done on the show, all 245 episodes, by signing up for our Patreon. And that is a way to directly support the podcast, make sure it keeps coming out each and every week and in high quality. So if you'd like to check that out, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today, and you get instant access to all those materials. So we've got a bunch of brand new patrons this week. Thank you to Graham, Jonathan, Jordy, and Brandon for signing up at the $5 level. And I also want to thank Charles and Elliot for upgrading their pledges from the $3 level to the $5 level in order to get some of those extra benefits that we have over there. So again, in order to sign up, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you will find all of that material ready to go and ready to be utilized by you in your practice sessions. All right, let's jump into this episode where we are going to talk about some of the rhythmic elements of Charlie Parker's solos and talk about some concrete ways that you can start to incorporate this stuff into your own playing and start to develop some of these rhythmic ideas that you can use on the fly. So it's important to realize that not only did Charlie Parker revolutionize the harmonic aspects of jazz improvisation, he also did a lot for the rhythm. He was really fond of mixing up the rhythm, incorporating a lot of different durations of notes in the same phrases, and that's what we're going to look at today. He also was a really, really prolific double time player, and the proliferation of double time that we hear in modern jazz, we can really attribute a lot of that to his playing. He was just such a master of the saxophone. He could play at any tempo. He could play any combination of notes, no matter how difficult they were to pull off. He really was a modern day master of his instrument and really brought the idea of basically virtuosic playing to the jazz world. Now, there were a lot of extremely, extremely amazing players before Charlie Parker, but after he came along and after the bebop revolution happened, you almost had to be at the very, very top of your game as far as being able to play anything, be able to play over any chord changes at any tempo. He was really the one that made that a requirement. And now you kind of can't get by without being any less than a virtuoso if you want to be at the top of the heap as far as jazz musicians go. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because he just is responsible for so many of the aspects of modern jazz. And sometimes we don't think about it because it was all the way back in late 1940s, early 1950s. But it's really amazing what he did and the stage that he set. All right, so we're going to look at two phrases today. These are longer phrases than we've looked at in the past two episodes. And we're really going to look at the rhythmic variety that Bird uses in these two phrases. So let's start with number one. Take a look at your PDF and you will find the first phrase that we are about to listen to right now. And then we're going to talk about it after. So here's the first phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very nice phrase, isn't it? So let's talk about the elements that I want you to pay attention to. So the first thing I want you to notice is how many different rhythmic figures that he uses in this. So we see dotted quarter notes, eighth note triplets, 16th notes, and 16th note triplets all in this phrase. So if we look at the second measure, he's got two back-to-back eighth note triplets on beat 2 and beat 3. And this is a really beautiful way that he uses to sort of jump register. And then he also uses a really beautiful chromatic line on beat 3 of measure 2. Now let's skip to the last beat in measure 3, where we see him using some 16th notes. And this is a really, really great way to sort of break up a line of eighth notes, is to come in with some double time. It doesn't have to be an entire measure of double time. I think a lot of people think when they go into double time playing, they've got to do it for an extended period of time. You don't, and Charlie Parker proves that. So now if we look at measure 4, beat 2, we see one of the rhythmic phrases that Charlie Parker likes the most. And this is a 16th note triplet followed by an eighth note. If you really study the playing of Charlie Parker, you hear this all the time. So if you want to get more of that characteristic bebop sound into your playing, I suggest studying this rhythmic device deeply. Go into the Omni book, check out a bunch of Charlie Parker's playing, check out how he uses it, and then try to put that into your own playing. So we see that on beat 2, measure 4. Now, if we go to beat 5, measure 2, we see another eighth note triplet. And these are all intermingled with basically eighth note lines, right? So think about how in a short period of 6 measures, he manages to fit in all of these different rhythmic durations of notes. You've got dotted quarter notes, eighth note triplets, 16th notes, and 16th note triplets. That's a lot. That's a lot of material that he manages to weave in just perfectly. And the thing about it is, it doesn't sound unnatural, right? So if you're just trying to get all of these different durations into your playing, it runs the risk of sounding like you're just trying to pack it all in. But Bird had this amazing way of doing it very, very organically, where you don't even think about it. You just think about the phrase and you go, wow, that sounds great. So there's our first example. Now I'm going to do is play that example twice for you at the tempo you heard it at already and a slightly faster tempo. And I really want you to pay attention to those different rhythmic figures that we talked about and see how nicely they assimilate themselves into the line. All right, let's check these out again. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four. All right, so there's our first phrase. Now let's jump to our second phrase on the PDF. This one's a little bit longer. This one's a full 8 bars. And we're going to notice even more interesting rhythmic material on this one, but let's listen to it once first at a slow tempo, and then we'll talk about the elements. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you can hear a lot going on in that one. So let's dive a little bit deeper. So we see in the first measure, we get a triplet on beat 4, an eighth note triplet. Now on beat 1 of measure 2, we see our characteristic 16th note triplet paired with an eighth note again. So again, this is really telling you this is a rhythmic figure that you should really study. Then we play some eighth notes, and on beat 4, measure 2, we have another eighth note triplet. Then we get this real, I think this is the most interesting part of the line, is measure 3, where we have these 16th notes, but they're grouped to the 8th notes in a really interesting way. So on beat 1, we see the 16th notes first, then we have an 8th note tied to a 16th note going into beat 2, another 16th note, 8th note on the and of 2, and then we have that same figure that we had on beat 1 on beat 3. Now, if you're not looking at the PDF, what I just said probably sounds really confusing. So if you could see it, it will make a lot more sense. But I think that this is the most interesting measure in the entire phrase. Then at the end of measure 4, we see this little double time figure, including a 16th note triplet. So on the and of 3, he starts in on some regular 16th notes. And then on the and of 4, we again hear that 16th note triplet pushing us into beat 1. Now, what I love about this next measure, the 5th measure, is that he balances all this sort of frantic rhythmic activity with a little bit of silence. We see a rest on beat 2 and then the first half of beat 3. Then as we push into measure 6, we see an entire measure of 8th notes. And then we finish things out in measure 7 with a 16th note figure on beat 2. So again, you could see the rhythmic diversity of this phrase is just awesome. It's all over the place. He's intermingling all these different durations of notes into one phrase. And when you listen to it, it just sounds beautiful. Awesome pacing. He's balancing it with silence. It's just textbook on how to make a phrase. So let's check this one out again at the same tempo you just heard, and then a little bit of a faster tempo after that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That phrase is something that you can study for quite a while and find new things constantly. All right, so here's your assignment. I want you to write anywhere from like 3 to 5 lines. Pick an easy chord progression, maybe the first 4 bars of the blues, or a 2-5-1 or a 3-6-2-5-1, something that is a pretty standard chord progression that you're going to see anywhere. And write, like I said, 2 to 5 lines. And I don't want you to immediately throw yourself into using all of these different rhythmic durations that Charlie Parker is. Start slow. So maybe in your first line, use some triplets, use some 8th note triplets, and see if you can come up with a really good sounding line, just incorporating those triplets with some 8th notes and quarter notes and dotted quarter notes and stuff like that. Once you feel like you've done a pretty good job with that, maybe now start to add a beat of 16th notes here and there. So add 1 beat of double time material and start to figure out how you can utilize that rhythmic figure along with your triplets and 8th notes. Then once you start feeling really comfortable with that, then you could start to put maybe some 16th note triplets into your playing and see if you can incorporate those. Those 16th note triplets, they may require a little bit of outside study before you feel like you can do that in a seamless way. But take your time. Don't shoot for the moon right away. Start to make your phrases a little bit more rhythmically complex, one step at a time. It's kind of like thinking about harmonic material. You don't want to use these super crazy advanced, substitutions or harmonic structures before you can just play over the regular chord. Think about that with rhythm as well. If you can't incorporate a regular 8th note triplet into your playing in a way that makes sense, there's no way you're going to incorporate a 16th note triplet because it's a little bit more advanced and the requirements for putting them into phrases are a little bit different. Okay, so I want you to go step by step. Heck, even write 50 lines if you want to. That would be the best thing to do. But, write at least 5 lines of this stuff and try to make them more complicated as you go along. And remember to post those lines in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. We've got some of our most hardworking and accomplished students doing that over there already. So join in the party. Just go to Facebook, type in 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community, and you will find our group over there. It's a great place, a lot of really supportive people. And remember, grab these PDFs. Go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and it only costs you $3 or $5 a month to get your hands on that stuff. All right, hope you enjoyed this. Next week, we're going to write an etude trying to incorporate some of these ideas that we've talked about this week, and we're going to have a blast with that. Hope everybody is staying safe and healthy out there. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.